Well, welcome everyone to this morning's Facebook Live session with Jacob, Ty, and Stephanie from AgileDad. We wanted to go ahead and actually talk about a topic that ends up causing a lot of not only concern, but a lot of potential success within organizations. We're talking about some things that are the topic of some recent blog posts that we actually have. We're going to go into detail about velocity and estimation, right? And going beyond just the numbers themselves, what the predictability is that we try to go ahead and have behind those numbers, so teams can be more successful and organizations can pivot as quickly as possible to get the right type of return for what they're trying to go ahead and do. There's a few things that we're gonna chime in on this morning, and if anyone joins us live, feel free to go ahead and write some comments, and we're happy to go ahead and answer those in line. So otherwise, if you have comments after the fact, we're also happy to go ahead and address those as those come in. So we appreciate any of your feedback as we go through these types of topics. So let's kick it off a little bit. Estimation. Ty, you've worked with a lot of teams as far as how they estimate things. Why do we estimate in the first place? What are we really trying to accomplish here?
Yeah. Well, like Jacob said, I do want to invite you all to look at the blog on our website on AgileDad.com. That'll have more detail. We're going to be pretty high level today. We're just going to kind of touch on the topics of some of these topics, and if you want to really dive deeper, go ahead and take a look at our blog there. But so why do we estimate? You know, what is the purpose of all of this? It seems like we spend a lot of time talking about it, doing it. You know, we have these backlog grooming sessions. We're talking about how big is it, what is it. So why do we do all this? Basically, it's coming down to we need to know the cost of something before we do it. We know that different things have different story items will have value. Some will be more valuable than others, and also some will be bigger than others. So we need to have an idea of what's a large, what is going to take a lot of time and it'll be really complex, and what's going to be easy. And we also know that there's not really a correlation between which things will be really valuable and which things are going to be really big. So by kind of identifying which ones are smalls and which ones are larges, and in between, we can, and then pairing that with a priority estimate, we can do the small things that are going to be worth a lot first, and then we can, into the other things. So it also, it gives us, like I said before, it gives us that idea of the cost of developing before we get into it, so that we don't end up and say, oh my gosh, this water is way deeper than I expected. I jumped into the deep end of the pool and now I can't touch. And now we're committed and we have to finish this, and it's going to take way longer than we expected. So, and we'll get into this part of it more near the end of this video, but by estimating, obviously we can start, that helps us start to project and forecast and plan out our future work. So one example I really like to use, and I think of, in high school I did a lot of physics classes, and in college I did a lot of physics classes. So kind of the base formula that we all use is distance equals velocity times time. That's the basic one, and that's kind of what you extrapolate out all your other more advanced, much more difficult formulas. But if we know, so we need to know our distance so that we can calculate our time. We can solve for time, and that's really what your executives are most likely asking. How long is this going to take? How much is this going to cost me? How many man hours are we going to put into developing this? And really just, are we there yet? When will this be done? So if we know our distance, how far we have to go, and we find that through our estimation, then we can, over time, we can find out and solve for our velocity, and then we'll be able to calculate the time that it will take to develop all of these awesome features that we want. And we can kind of pick and choose which ones that we need. We can trim down our distance if we need to, so that we can hit our target time. But that's kind of the big those are the big reasons that we estimate. Really, what it comes down to is we're wanting to be able to figure out the time it will take us to complete that body of work, that backlog.
Excellent. You bring up some really good points, Ty. And to be honest, you brought out the inner nerd in me, because I'm actually very much I love physics, absolutely love physics. So when we're looking at things, we're trying to actually determine, when is this potentially going to be done, or when can we potentially project so that we'll have a certain amount of work that is completed, right? That's what estimation is trying to tell us. It's giving us a best guess, right? And it's giving us, based on certain factors that we know, where are we actually then moving forward, right? Now, I oftentimes work with teams, and one of the most difficult things with estimation that people have a hard time with is this whole concept of relative sizing, right? Relative sizing. And people will say, well, what does that mean? How do I tie it back to like an hour? Or does 1 point mean it's 8 hours? Does 5 points mean it's 80 hours? And I'm like, no. This is not a mathematics equation, right? We're trying to go ahead and actually see what are those real relative sizes. Stephanie, in groups that you've worked with, what are you doing to help to understand the whole concept of relative sizing with those teams and individuals?
Sure. So as you mentioned, time is a comparison for a lot of reasons. If you think of a technical team where there may be a junior and a senior engineer, they may be working on a similar project in regards to effort, but it's going to take the senior engineer probably a significantly less amount of time than it would the junior engineer, right? So it's we can think about it too in a more general sense of when we say, gosh, time flies when you're having fun. We're really bad at estimating relative time. We can think of another example as well. So I can run a mile in about 10-ish minutes, depending on my day. But I have some really fit friends that laugh at that, and they do it in 6 minutes. Are we running the same amount of distance? Absolutely. That said, there are other folks, my parents, for example, they might walk a mile for 20 minutes in about 20 minutes or so. Now, what is that going to show us though? We're all getting from point A just a separate amount of time. So I think we need to think about it more. And I know, Jacob, you're going to go into this a little bit more when it comes to relative sizing and saying, are things small? Are they large? What does that mean, right? I'm sure Jacob is also going to touch on this in regards to story points. And if I say something is a 3, does that mean it takes 3 minutes to complete, or does it take 3 days to complete? We don't know, but getting that relative sizing really helps the team plan, adjust, and set goals appropriately.
Agreed. And I like that you pointed that out, right? Because this is for the team to be able to set goals, but the value of it is actually so they understand their own predictability. And then beyond that, so product owner and management can actually try to go ahead and see, what can we actually do long term? And that has a little bit to do with, some of the topics that we're actually getting into, as far as that velocity is an indicator of what can we potentially start promising, or what can we project for stakeholders, right? Sizes are always interesting, right? You'll have people that say, I hate numbers. I absolutely hate numbers. And usually when I tell them that, I say, well, then let me not tell you that I have 8 kids, right? Because it baffles some people, and they're like, how does that happen? I said, well, when a man loves a woman, and they're like, no, that's not what I mean. So, but when we get into the details like that, so when we get into numbers themselves, we really try to go ahead and see, why is it that we don't need every single layer of granularity for our numbers, right? So we can look at the 0, which probably means something's already done. 1 is relatively small. 2 is typically a baseline number that's used. Then you got 3, 5, 8, 13. And if you're using the true Fibonacci sequence, you then jump to 21 and 34 and 55 and 89. So, but the reality is when you get anything that's 13 or above, it probably means it's too big to be completed in a short period of time, right? And I find that most teams are looking at something around the 5 or the 8, as the thing that can be completed in their sprint, or for teams using more of just a Kanban or a Scrumban type approach, they still want things to be relatively small because the cycle time is important to them to try to get things finished in a short period of time, okay? Now, t-shirt sizing is a very commonly used thing, and I'm noticing it used more and more with teams to get an idea not only at release planning level, but sometimes even at the sprint planning level, right? And you know, when you look at something that's a small, usually we can agree that an effort, the complexity and or time that's involved makes an effort relatively small, okay? And we're looking at this, you know, we say, well, what's that small in comparison to? Well, it's in comparison to everything else that's actually on your list, right? So that's the small or the baseline item that you start referencing. When you go and start looking at other things like that, you know, you'll see if you go to McDonald's and you order a large drink, how many ounces is that? Right? Is it 32? Right. What if you go to Burger King? Is it more than that? Right. So there's some type of reference in relationship to other things that they're doing, and not every size ends up being the same, right? So it's the whole concept of the size 7 shoe doesn't cost $7. Doesn't take 7 people to go ahead and make it. It's not 7 hours or 7 days. So it's a 7 in comparison to the other sizes that are there. There's some things that are larger that are 8s and 9s. So things that are smaller, 6s, 5s, 4s, right? And we start looking at that, and it's important to just be able to see the reference in relationship to other items that are being worked on. That's the real value that we're looking at. It doesn't have to be absolute. It doesn't have to be the same for every single team. So, and I think that's some of the uneasiness oftentimes that product owners and executives have behind that, because it suggests that they need to observe and they need to actually follow that team and see what can I do to support them so we can maximize what that team is capable of, instead of actually making sure it's uniform across every team, which we're not cookie cutters. We're not robots. We're not plug and play, right? So in a USB and a flash drive type world, you know, we're not actually the folks that are the plug and play. We have to make sure that we're focusing on the individuals, and that's what relative sizing does, is it helps us to focus on the individuals who are trying to be successful. Now this gets into an interesting topic here. It gets into the topic of people always want to go ahead and have as much detail as early as possible, right? So, and we talk about this a lot. I know Ty's talked about it and Stephanie's talked about it. I've heard Lee talk about it and Eliza. We hear this all sorts of different times. Accuracy versus precision, right? Take a look at that image that we actually have on our site, because, you know, it's a really good depiction of accuracy versus precision. Accuracy, we're hitting roughly the mark, right? We can be very precise, but we can be off mark, right? So we have to determine what's the right time to be accurate and what's the right time to be precise, right? And as we get closer to implementing something, that's where we have a need to be more precise, okay? Let's talk just a little bit about the topic of why is it that, what does a known velocity do for us as far as planning is concerned? Ty, I know that in some of your work with a few clients recently, in helping to identify velocity as far as a potential release planning or a quarterly type backlog planning, it helped to go ahead and set the right mark as far as what could potentially be committed to, or at least the line drawn for what is potentially in or out of a release timeframe or a quarterly timeframe. Can you tell us a little bit about how that helped stakeholders have the right expectations as well as the team?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, this was in the team that was a little bit, we'd been using Agile they've been using Agile for a while, and so they had this an idea of a known velocity for, you know, historical velocity that we were able to then use and extrapolate an estimate of how much work we could get done in a sprint, in a release. So a release was doing quarterly releases, and so we knew we had about 6 full sprints. And let's say, for example, that this team was doing 50 points per sprint. So we knew that we had 300 story points to work with in that release. And so that in our long-term, you know, planning, that gave us a really good idea of how much could get done. And, you know, with a properly groomed and refined backlog that has good estimates of how big things are, we were able to kind of slot in how much of about 300 points worth of work, and starting with the thing that is most important, the thing that needs to get done first, and then working our way down. And then, of course, there's a little bit of uncertainty as we get further down, but we know with almost 100% surety that maybe those 200 first points will be done, and then after that it starts getting a little bit less sure, but at least we'll know how much will be done, and that we'll have about 300 points of work that can be done. And this kind of comes going back to the accuracy versus precision thing. And in all of these estimates, we're really focusing on being accurate or being close to the center, but maybe not getting that really tight grouping of oh, we're right on the mark. Because if we're always just kind of in the right area, then we'll be able to, I think we'll overestimate as much as we underestimate, and it'll all just kind of work out. So you don't want to spend too much time in your planning, either when you're talking about just a sprint level or even at a bigger release level. Don't spend too much time really like debating whether it's a 5 or an 8, or if it's a small or a medium. We just want to get a quick estimate and move on, and it'll work out. It's going to be okay. We don't always have to be perfect in our estimates. What's important is that we're close and we're consistent.
Sure. And I remember sitting in on a sprint planning session this past week with the group, and I'll tell you, it was 5 minutes that they were arguing, and I said, well, what's the difference in the estimate? You're estimating a 3 or a 5. I know, but it could be very difficult. Well, so put it as a 5. But it could be really easy. So make a decision, right? In the time that we've actually argued about this, which they wanted to keep going, in the time that they were arguing about it, they could have actually gone ahead and started looking at potential solutions. And it wasn't actually solving the problem right then and there. It was getting them an idea as to whereabouts were they, right? If there's more uncertainty, if there's more dependencies, then if you're uncertain or there's a heavy amount of dependencies, then fine, go with the 5, right? There's going to be other times that you rank something as a 5, or you estimate it as a 5, and it's going to come in more as a 3, right? So there's always that fluctuation that happens. So, and the amount of rigor that goes behind that isn't so important as where does it get us? Does it get us in the target, right? So because if we're in that range, then we can fine tune and we can adjust kind of where we need to go. Because that's even suggesting that the path that we're going, yes, we make a long-term plan as to where we're going, but we have to actually respect the ability to be able to pivot, right? If all of a sudden one of those aspects becomes suddenly like more important to focus on that one aspect, then maybe we get more details behind that, or we develop more features in that area, because that's something that is really going to be more successful for us, right? So that's where it allows us to not get so precise that we can't still pivot and get to the things that are really needed by our consumers that are asking for products and solutions from us. So
yeah, and so one thing that I think helps a lot of teams not be overly precise and not be so worried about are we right on with our estimates. It's just, instead of having, oh, our velocity is 25, just have a range. We are usually around 23 to 28 points. And then you can kind of just be in that range, and you have an optimistic and a pessimistic number, and that helps you not be overly precise and just focus on being close enough and accurate. And then another just side point is, don't use velocity as a comparison across different teams. Teams are different. They estimate different. There's so many differences that it's not a fair comparison. A team with a velocity of 30 is not faster or better than a team with a velocity of 25. So just don't fall into that rabbit hole.
okay. Well, I know there's a lot of other topics we can potentially go ahead and address, but I think that's about the time that we have for today. So thank you everyone for joining us. So we'll be kicking off another meeting here in about a week. So we're going to try to go ahead and make this weekly. So to go ahead and kind of make sure that we're addressing the the topics that are they're the most relevant to go ahead and actually have as far as things that we're seeing with clients, things that we're seeing across the Agile and Scrum communities. So we want to really go ahead and provide some good insight for you from what we're seeing on the ground, as well as what we're seeing just across the community as a whole. So don't hesitate to go ahead and comment. And for those of you that joined during the live session, we appreciate any of your feedback. So make sure you take a look a little bit further at the blogs that are recently on the site related to estimation and velocity. So thank you, Ty, for going into some more detail on those. So there's a lot of very applicable things that exist there that can help us to be successful. The idea here is it's not just numbers, right? It's actually helping us to really be predictable. It's helping us to go ahead and see how can we know, what is it that we're trying to go ahead and deliver, right? That's the big thing that we're looking at here.
And when can it be done? Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We try to go ahead and answer there. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. We sure appreciate your time this morning. So thank you, Ty, and thank you, Stephanie, so for joining us in what I know is a busy day that you guys have scheduled. So we'll look forward to talking again soon.
Bye.
Bye.